Hello and welcome. We are continuing our chemistry studies, and the next topic is purifying water. And here is a diagram that shows how water can be purified. Now, the first thing to remember is this is not sewage treatment. This is not recycling sewage for drinking water. This is using an appropriate source, for example, a reservoir that supplies the water that we're going to purify, and the system goes a little something like this. So we start off here with some screens, and these screens are just basically made of metal. They've got metal bars going across and along, as you can see there, and what they do is they remove things like leaves and twigs and other bits and pieces that can sometimes get in the reservoir. It could even be things like old boots and stuff that's been chucked in there, but these screens remove that kind of stuff. And remember, this is not filtering. This is just screens that remove large bits of debris, as we've just mentioned. Okay, now the next stage after that is where we have what we call a settlement tank, and this is where any sand or soil just settles out. So it sits in this tank for quite a little while, and as it sits there, all the sand and soil and bits and pieces can settle out, and we have removed another amount of impurities that are in there. The next stage after that is we sometimes have this substance added called aluminium sulfate, and what aluminium sulfate does is it makes particles of dirt clump together and settle, or it can contribute to that happening, and we sometimes call this process coagulation, sometimes seen it also referred to as flocculation. I think I've spelled that correctly, not flocculations. And the next stage after that, an important one to remember, is when the water is filtered. So the water goes through a filter bed, and this is made of fine sand, and that is where the remaining particles of any insoluble solids, anything that's insoluble, is removed. So the water seeps through the sand. Insoluble and is solid will be filtered out by the sand, and this actually is the process of filtering. After we've done that, we've got a very clear liquid, but that doesn't mean to say it's completely safe. We then need to do the next stage, which is to add our chlorine, and chlorine is added to the water in order to kill bacteria. Don't say to remove bacteria, because removing bacteria is something different to killing bacteria, and it's not relevant also, or it's not correct to say disinfect. You have to say the chlorine is added to kill bacteria, and that makes it safe for drinking. Now, one other thing that is often added in some areas is fluorine, and fluorine in the form of fluoride ions, sometimes we say fluoride, is added, and this is added in some areas because it helps to harden teeth. And if we've got harder teeth as children are growing up, or even with adults, it reduces the need for fillings and things like that. So this is added in some areas as well. However, there is some discussion whether this should be added to water or not, and there are arguments on both sides of it, and you should be aware of some of those arguments. So arguments 4 is that it reduces tooth decay. So if we add fluorine, it hardens teeth and therefore reduces tooth decay, and also it's only added in tiny amounts, so if there is any negative impact or negative effect that it has, it's in tiny amounts, so it won't really cause a problem. Arguments on the against side, however, are that there are possible links with learning difficulties. Doesn't need a bullet there. Possible links with learning difficulties, and some people say it's unethical. This is a treatment that's given to everybody because everyone needs drinking water, and they are given this treatment whether they like it or not. A lot of toothpaste have fluoride in them, which can harden teeth, and if you think that, well, you don't want to take the risk of health diseases, any health issues, you don't have the choice whether you can take the fluoride or not, and you can't say, well, I'll just have it in my toothpaste and not in my water. So some people don't like that idea, but there's a couple of arguments for and against the addition of fluorine. Once we've got through that process, it's then taken to your homes and factories and schools and so on. Okay, so this is an overview of how that works. Here I've got it without all the diagrams and pictures, so you might find this useful. If it came up as a 6-mark question, that would be really great, because it's not a very difficult thing to be able to talk about, but there it is anyway, just a summary of what goes on. The next thing is that once we do get into the home, once the water is in the home, there are sometimes filters that are used by some people, This is in order to remove any of the remaining substances that might still be in there. So sometimes we have it linked to our water supply, so the water supply is coming into the home here. It passes through the filter, and then it then goes to the tap, where you can then use it for drinking water. So what the filter has and what it does is link to the substances that are in there, and the first one is carbon. So packed inside here is some carbon, and the reason we have carbon is because it removes or reduces chlorine levels and possibly other chemicals. Water could still have traces of pesticides that may have got into the waterway through farmers using pesticides on land, and all of that may not have been removed. So carbon is a good way to remove any traces of those if there are some in there. It also, as we said, helps to reduce chlorine, and some people feel that they can taste the chlorine, and removing that will improve the taste of the water. The other substance we have is what we call ion exchange resin. Resin is a kind of polymer, and it's designed in order to remove calcium, magnesium, and possibly lead or copper or aluminium ions that might be in the water through pollution. So these can be removed through an ion exchange resin. You don't need to know the exact details of how that works. We did talk about how it works with calcium and magnesium, and that should be enough. You don't need to know details of the chemistry. And the last thing that might be added in there is some particles of silver, and this actually discourages the bacterial growth on the resin. So if any bacteria start to grow, silver is actually toxic to them, these silver particles, and that will discourage the growth of those bacteria. So this is one way in which water can be purified or further purified or filtered once it gets into the home, and it's often done in this way. Sometimes you have jugs that you can fill with water from the tap, and they have a little filter that is fitted in there, and sometimes kettles have those as well. But these are the key ideas behind how they work. So this is how we treat water and how we supply water to homes, and further treatment that we can do when we're at home. One last thing to mention is that if you want very pure water, i.e. pure water with nothing in it except for water, we can produce what we call distilled water. And distilled water, I'm sure you've come across this idea before, but the way this works is we have some water, we heat it, that then evaporates. The evaporated water, the water vapor, is passed through some tubes, it's cooled down, and then it condenses back into water again. So this will be what we call distilled water, and it's pure. It's 100% water, nothing else dissolved in there at all. Now, while we could do this and produce water in this way so that we are happy that it's completely clear and only water and nothing else in there, this is a very expensive method to actually provide water. If we wanted to do this on a large scale, you'd have to provide large amounts of heat to evaporate and distill large amounts of water, and that could be very expensive. Okay, so nothing too difficult really on here, it's just stuff that you've got to go through and know and remember. So that's me done for today's video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you